So, as you see, I'm going to talk about what many people call food porn. I usually, whenever I present, I like to lay out my plan. So, before going on trying to define what food porn is, I want to make some preliminary remarks regarding the hedonic function of food representation. Then I move to discussing the concept of food porn and articulate bring out some types of food porn, and then move on to the gist of the paper. The gist of the paper, I would say, which is the nature of that hedonic effect that you get from watching what people call food porn. And I define this one of the psychological responses to food porn as constructive gustatory imagination, or CGI in short. And after that, I have this notion of CGI on the table, which I take to be one of its most central functions of food porn. I can then ask, given that food porn functions to cause CGI, can we say that food porn is actually porn? Maybe that's the question. And my tentative answer there is no. And then I move on to ask whether, given CGI, can food porn be art? And there my, again, tentative answer is yes, maybe. Okay, but let's go, before moving on to the point two, when I first planned this talk, I wanted to make this narrative introduction. So I was trying to think of representation of food in the context of cookbooks. So at least my initial story I wanted to tell was how, when it comes to cookbooks, at least in my personal memories, and mostly in Eastern Europe, or maybe Central Europe, this kind of instructional function of cookbooks has given way to this more hedonic function, where cookbooks are more read in case just to get some pleasure from it, imagining the pretty foods that those cookbooks are explicitly depicted as in the left picture, or at least hint at. So I mean, there's a contrast here between Soviet time, cookbook from Czech Republic during Soviet times, very minimalist. There's no food illustrations, almost no food illustrations there, and more modern, it's German cookbook, where it's really this kind of pleasurable element is accentuated in the cover. And I thought that in my story to tell, it seems like in current day, cookbooks really mostly serve this kind of hedonic function, and this instruction function is not that central even. But then I discovered that there's this picture is from a Soviet-era cookbook from 1939. And one of the main cookbooks that was basically used in that time during the era of Stalin. And I mean, this, in modern day, I would say, this picture in that cookbook definitely would deserve a title food porn. So there's also this kind of strongly hedonic element in this very, very old cookbook. So this kind of initial naive story obviously didn't work out. But the reason why I'm still talking about it is that it's kind of interesting to think of different functions or roles of food representation. And when it comes to even cookbooks, then cookbooks still serve, of course, the function to inform and to instruct, and many people read them for that purpose, of course. But still, there's often this strong element of the hedonic element, which is often even, for many people, even more important, just to read those cookbooks and get some pleasure from just reading it. So, quote by Rachel Cook, who's a food writer, I think, she wrote this in Guardian. So she says about cookbooks: we buy them by the dozen, and we read them, many of us in bed and elsewhere, devouring every page, hungry as if they were novels. But how many do we really use? Not many is my guess. Well, I mean, her guess might be somewhat inaccurate, perhaps, but it's still noticeable that cookbooks these days, and it seems like maybe during Stalin era as well, serve this kind of hedonic function. And were pleasure by in themselves, without really many people read them, really wanting to use them to choose something with them. So this was like, as I said, preliminary. And to move on to so-called food porn, there are multiple types of food representation, obviously. So we have, as I said, cookbooks. That's one example, a very early one. We have pictures, and we have videos, which are very important contemporary social media. So I mean, the lower picture is so-called mukbang. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. It's a Korean term, but it's very popular in South Korea. It's become popular in, I think, in the United States as well. These are videos of just people eating stuff. But these are really popular in South Korea. I mean, this talk won't be about mukbang, although it's a really interesting topic. But I feel that mukbang also serves like this kind of merely hedonic function, might not be primary. It's often like many people watch this in South Korea at least they see this other person eating such a like large amount of stuff, and so they just do some admiration, for instance. So people who want to keep their weight, they kind of be curious to watch other people eating, and someone helps them to avoid. At least it helps some people. Probably it might have opposite effect to some other people, because it maybe inspires them to eat even more themselves. But this mukbang is really interesting, but it's so, it seems like so multifunctional and complex phenomenon. So I'm coming from an analytic philosophy, I'm like really toning down and focusing on very simplistic phenomena, or more simplistic phenomena. So yeah, my focus is on visual representation of food. In this case, the hedonic function is at the center. I'll give some examples quite soon. And the term food porn, very roughly, if you treat it very roughly, then it covers this kind of visual representations. And also, I mean, the eating videos and also cooking videos can deserve the label, but get the label food porn quite often. But I try to, again, pin down my focus on focusing on food photography. And also it depicts food and nothing else. So if it depicts the people who make the food or eat the food, then it adds certain complications. And I want to avoid it. Very briefly about the history of the term. It's actually supposedly first time it was used in Rosalind Cowell's book, Female Desire, which I fortunately haven't read. But the term there was used in the context of feminist critique, something I need to read in the future, I suppose. And the closely related term gastro-porn appeared in 1977, and there it is meant to denote depiction of food and in cookbooks, which are supposed to induce excitement in the sense of unattainability. It's kind of this pictures that create like a sense of kind of fantastic gustatory situation, which actually I personally who's like reads about it can't realize for themselves. So that's the background of this term, and actually gastroporn is very close to what I want to talk about. No one uses gastroporn these days. At least it's not very common term. So there should be more examples I feel, to just like make it a bit more clear what they're thinking about. But I have this short list of various pictures, starting from, I would say, more paradigm examples, because there are paradigm examples of food porn. It's like, if you look at Instagram and Pinterest, for instance, these are like main examples. So let's start from paradigm. I would say this is a good paradigm.
That's disgusting.
And one of the reasons why I think food porn is used is it's a bit disgusting, for many at least. Let's move. This is a bit more stylish example, but still it's kind of very. You can see this kind of this very like color-rich element is emphasized there. Somewhat more ascetic representation, but actually, if you like food porn in Instagram, then these rather nice, less disgusting perhaps pictures are quite common as well, and also label food porn is used. Okay. There is like Scandinavian style of food porn. Now lots more contentious cases, although I'm still willing to believe that many people will use food porn here as well. This is actually, my friend shared this photo with me. It's rutabaga is the term for vegetable. I'm not sure it's Spanish, but it's a turnip-like vegetable, I think, and it's covered with pink sugar. And for me, at least, it certainly makes me think what is going on here exactly. But I'm quite curious. And finally, I mean, well, I don't know. I don't know. This, who knows? I mean, this is clearly not the paradigm because there's no like unctuous, appealing. I mean, for some maybe, but it's not very appealing. Okay. So, I mean, I'm not giving a definition, sorry, but I think it's rather too difficult in the context of this talk. But I mean, I think it's like one of the central features. What for a food picture to qualify as food porn, it has to like stimulate pleasurable arousal for the person who labels it. I mean, maybe you can. Okay, so I mean, word arousal, I'm not sure if the best word as a non-native speaker, but I mean, given we're talking about food porn, then maybe arousal is a good expression here. But I mean, I just want to say that it's somehow when you look at the picture, it's in a way you enjoy looking at it, and it's like it kind of excites your taste buds, if you use a metaphoric, it's almost metaphoric expression. And often food porn depicts its kind of excesses as this, so definitely in the first picture. Often it depicts sugar and or fatty food. I put this in brackets because I mean I don't want to exclude at least this Scandinavian type kind of dish from the meriting the label food porn. And it certainly doesn't depict the culinary excess. One I think very common feature in this picture is also that they actually get manipulated quite a bit. What this manipulation amounts to, I'll return back later to it. And I mean, again, why it's called porn? I guess you could say it's like it's not. I mean, if you take pleasure in watching those pictures and take this kind of I would say gustatory pleasure. I use the word gustatory a lot in this talk. Then I mean, it's not a real thing, and that's actually porn. I mean, what you're looking at is in a way it's like vicarious sex in a way. You know? It's like watching food porn is like vicariously eating or something like that. So that's the somewhat vague characterization of food porn. But my interest in this talk is what this pleasurable arousal could amount to in case of food porn. So, like, this is basically a problem situation from which I started, at least when I started to think about this topic. So, like, from the aesthetic perspective, if you consider, especially if you perhaps consider this first picture, this paradigmatic picture, it's kind of, you might ask, well, if you redo aesthetics and mix art and aesthetics, so why should we be interested in food porn? There's like something, if you think of the behavior of a person who watches this, it's somewhat automatic, there's not much discrimination involved, it seems. So it might seem that there's a reason to dismiss it as a kind of worthy object of investigation. And I mean, my overall goal of this paper is to argue that, well, wait a minute, or there's something interesting going on in this so-called pleasurable arousal that people get from food porn. And I mean, what I hope to argue that food porn enables us to engage in valuable gustatory imaginings. And then we can arrive at this a bit later, of course. So the questions, what does this pleasurable arousal excitement consist in? So what are the psychological responses that food porn affords, which makes watching it arousing in a certain way? And if and how do these responses matter for the both aesthetic and artistic revelation of food porn? So now the question is, how should we understand the pleasure and this arousal that people get from watching football? Well, I go through certain options, and this first proposal, maybe I devote too much time on this, but again, this is something the idea I started with pretty much. So, I mean, if it's arousal, then it seems to suggest some kind of desirous attitude towards the thing that you're looking at. So maybe that's what makes this like arousing or exciting watching football. It's some desire, some desire to eat. Here, I mean, it's unclear. The problem here is that it's unclear what the content of that desire could be. So there are three options that it suggests. I give like specific issues with each of them, and then move on to the more broader problem with this kind of desire-based approach. But these options are to eat that particular stuff that was photographed, to eat something similar or of the same type as what this was photographed, and just to eat something, so like hunger. So third option would be like this pleasure of arousal consists in like being hungry. So first like to target each of them in turn, and then before moving on to the general objection. So I mean the specific objection to the first idea, I mean this might not be that pressing to some of you, but it seems that again that the causal source of the image, what was photographed, that's usually, or very often at least, expired. It doesn't. It's a weird desire to actually want that thing that was photographed. It's kind of something irrational about it. And some might argue, well, it's fine. Desires are irrational, and you have an irrational desire. I still think it's a concern that should be taken into account. And also, related to that, it seems like if you really wanted to eat that particular thing that was photographed, then some knowledge about what happened to that thing that was photographed that should affect the pleasure of arousal that you get from it, watching it photographed. And at least in my case, I don't think that's the case. I'm fully aware that the thing that was photographed, it's probably in someone's stomach or in a toilet somewhere, but this doesn't affect my pleasure in watching it at all. Okay, let's move forward. So eat something similar. So if that were the case, then there should be people should have motivation to seek out or cook themselves similar foods. This sometimes might happen, but I don't have clear references here. But there's insofar as I read those authors who have considered people or watch food images, there's no clear indication that people really are motivated to really do something after watching those images. So the watching it is a reward in itself, it seems. It's not like you're motivated to really do something to get to its similar things that you saw. So I don't think that's the best proposal either. So third one, just hunger. Here, maybe I'm following too much my introspection here, but it seems to me that I can take full pleasure in watching food porn also when I'm satiated. So even if I'm eating my full, and I can still get pleasure from watching watching those pictures. So there's no clear correlation between being hungry and getting pleasure or being pleasurably excited by what you see. I put it in brackets as maybe a more minor thing, but I think that hunger is objectless state. Actually, it can be satisfied by whatever you eat, basically. Not whatever, but also it's still quite indiscriminate, let's say. But this pleasurable arousal that we get, it seems to be directed at this what is depicted. So we take pleasure in what is depicted in those FP images. I'm going to talk about FP now. It's so shorthand. Okay, these are specific issues with all these three ideas. I think there are more general problems. I mean, first thing, I didn't put this on a slide, but this issue that the fact that we can take this pleasure in watching FP also when satiated, I think actually it speaks against all those three proposals, because it seems to indicate that we take pleasure in that thing itself, that we take pleasure in watching that thing itself, not in having some kind of desire. And the further thing is that, what was on the slide as well, it seems that, well, there are this desire can be pleasurable. I think this is uncontagious, should be uncontagious. But I mean, it's pleasurable only in certain conditions, it seems. So it's pleasurable when there's some good chance of being able to satisfy this desire. So at least I take this to be intuitive, and you may dispute this during Q&A. But it seems like desire is pleasurable only in certain contexts when the possibility of satisfying that desire is high enough. And in the case of food porn, especially the types of food porn that depict these rather unattainable foods, it seems like a chance of satisfying this desire is very meager. So it seems like this desire-based proposal, they kind of think of this, like take this pleasure to be a pleasure of anticipation, but it's more like simply a pleasure of consumption in some sense, psychologically consuming that picture, or what is seen in the picture. So now, there's only one slide of that, but given Ophelia's talk yesterday, and unfortunately she left, I maybe should have devoted much more time on this possibility. And because alternative possibility here is that the pleasure is a purely visual pleasure that is taken in this appealing arrangement of visual properties, something like that. And obviously, not even occasion, this can maybe often be the case, of course. But the pleasure that we take in watching food porn as food porn seems to be distinctly the gustatory pleasure. We take pleasure in that food that we see, not just appealing arrangement of visual properties. And if Ophelia were here, we could maybe start a discussion with her whether I'm right or not. Then during Q&A, we can start a discussion with you, of course. But I mean, that's pretty much my only argument against this proposal. So it's a very short argument. But I think there's a distinction between just enjoying what we see, like maybe the colors and shapes and so forth, and enjoying the food itself. So enjoying what we see as food. So that's what I mean by gustatory pleasure. So now this is the third or fifth option, if you will, which is basically what I'm suggesting. So the pleasure that we take in watching food porn is primarily as food porn, or the gustatory pleasure that we take in watching it is pleasure from imagining eating what we see. So what we take, what we enjoy are these imagined gustatory properties of the food that we see in the image. So that's a proposal. I'm not taking this solely from the air. There's some empirical support to the idea that we simulate what it would be like to eat the food that's depicted. So Charles Spence has written this, and there's I only brought a few references, but there's some data on them. Watching food pictures actually involves simulating the sensory and motor experience and responses that are implicated also in actual food consumption. And I mean, this is the final point is not about the extra empirical support, it's just that when we bring out this imagining the multisensory. So it's not about just imagining taste, it's about imagining the flavor, which brings together odor, like smell, and tactile sensation as well. So I'm soon going to bring out the complication. But first, one might ask that for some it may seem strange that there's no room, the question might be that, is there any room left for desire on this picture? I mean, as in the beginning, I said that this arousal seems to be like desires in a way. So one like idea I've been toying with, but I mean it's not fully thought through, to be honest, is that, well, maybe if you has a pretend desire to eat what is depicted. So pretend the desires have been suggested in literature about how this responds to fiction. And maybe one extra reason why I'm tentative is that I used to argue against pretend desires in like early work. I mean, early is not straight to say them. Like I used to argue against the existence of pretend desires. So it's kind of fun if my motivation to now like retract my previous position which comes from food porn maybe. But it's maybe some imaginative analog of desire still that people have watched food porn, but it's not like actual desires to eat because we don't really. And as I tried to like argue before, there's no like motivation for postulating that. So okay, this again, as I said, I'm quite tentative here. So but I want to like complicate this imagination-based proposal a bit. So, if I mean, we could ask like what this imaginative activity consists in, and one way to understand it would be to say that it's like imagining what was photographed, what it would actually taste like. But if that's a proposal, then it seems that again one's pleasure should be affected about what we know about the causal source of that image. And this, I'm not sure about this because now I'm going to talk about manipulation a bit. Because I mean, this is something maybe not. It doesn't often happen in the case of an Instagram photos, but still in like many cases of food porn, images are these images are often manipulated. And there are different kinds of manipulation. I'm not sure if computer generation is manipulation, but I mean, I'm here interested in manipulation of the objects themselves that are photographed. So to bring in some examples, I mean, this is something that's very common in food advertising and food industry, but amateur photographs can do it as well, I think. So a few examples. So if you have like photos of ice cream, often the so-called ice cream is made from shaving cream because I think it kind of retains its consistency over a longer time. So motor oil may be used to make food look shiny, really appealing, but actually it's motor oil. So dish soap is used to create bubbles and longer-lasting foam. So if you want to make an appealing stack of pancakes, create an appealing stack of pancakes, there's actually a bunch of cardboard pieces in between. So I guess insofar as these images are manipulated, in a way they can be deceptive of the actual flavor of the causal source of the image. So like moving back to this idea that someone imagination aims at simulating what the food will actually taste like, then these manipulation cases, in those cases of manipulated food, if a person comes to know that the food source was manipulated, I mean, I think then if that person aims at simulating the actual taste, knowledge of the actual taste would affect the way the pleasure of that one gets. But it seems like the pleasure that people get isn't so dependent on the knowledge of the process that went into making that image. So, I mean, I'm still very this is pretty much in the spirit of the proposal already made, but I now talk about constructive gustatory imagination, where in a way it's not like simulating the actual taste of the photo item. It's more about constructing this kind of gustatory object in one's imagination. Okay, and so there's like more room for agent's activity in imagining in response to watching those images. And I mean, then again, I think it's not like completely up to the subject, but how they construct the object. It's still there are constraints, and these presumably come from the visual properties of what is seen. So still, I mean, there's a person who constructs that object relies on these like cross-modal associations between the visual properties and the causative properties. So there are still constraints. So the visual properties guide and constrain what is imagined. And I think, I mean, obviously, I mean, many if not most FP images, these are not manipulated, but I would think that viewers who watch food porn, then, I mean, in general, don't really care about the reality behind the image that much. So, I mean, I think it's, and then general, this constructive CGI generalizes to most cases. And these are like open questions, which if I had more time, I would maybe try to like discuss a bit more. But I think in this present context, it's not that important. I don't have much time anymore. Actually, 15 minutes is not much. As you can see, I'm not sure, but I mean, some of them may not be even well formed. But at least some of those questions I would like to think about a bit more. I mean, really interested in the final question, I mean, like, can this imagined experience instantiate properties that actually cannot be tasted in reality? But I don't want to stay on this much longer. So, okay, I have this idea now of this CGI, which is like, I would say, the typical response. Like people who enjoy those images, that's their typical response. And given that food porn is such a medium that affords the CGI, and I want to ask, is like calling food porn porn, how much does it really make sense? That is also maybe it's also one of my initial questions actually. So people talk about food porn, but in what sense this is actually, how good is this porn analogy? Now I feel that, actually, I don't think there's like a well-defined notion of pornography that's very distinct from art, for instance. I think I'm more disposed towards this more like non-exclusionist views. But even if you accept some kind of exclusionist view according to which there's a strong distinction between porn and art, for instance, because I want to move towards art, that's like later in that. So, is FP's capacity to afford CGI pornographic? So I just consider like two exclusionist options. So Levinson has claimed that there's such thing as pornographic interest, and when you take pornographic interest in a photo, for instance, then we treat it fully transparently. We just like consider what is depicted by the image for the purpose of kind of arousal fantasy and release, as Levinson puts it. And maybe we could define custody arousal and release. And the pleasurable arousal I thought about, you could call it custody arousal. So there's this arousal going on. But what to think of this release? So, maybe I'm mistaken. I suppose people watch action porn to get off, right? I think so. So I don't know, and I failed to find like an analog of masturbation in case of watching food porn. So the element of release seems to be missing. So if one wants to call interest of someone who like has CGI in response to food porn, this interest pornographic, then well, okay, there's this arousal involved, but there's no analog of release. This here I'm much more doubtful because I'm not sure if I fully understand how to pronounce his name. Maguire. His proposal. But anyway, he claims that pornography, as opposed to art, is manner in specific, and by which he means that it's a purpose of causing sexual arousal, and how exactly this purpose is, like how exactly person arrives at arousal by looking at an image is not, this how is not like irrelevant actually. So it's the pornography is managed inspecific because it's successful when it just causes arousal, and I would say release as well, or the further thing that people do. And I mean, here, I mean, I'm not sure, but I think that if you consider the CGI in response to food porn, I think if for someone like, if you consider whether the image is successful, it merely causes arousal, I mean, I would think people who take these images, at least for many of them, it's still like important that people take this pleasure in in those specific properties that they see and which they associate certain flavors. So it's like there's certain specificity going, specificity going on in case of pornography. But here I'm slightly unsure. So how much time?
Are you okay? You have 18 minutes. 8 minutes.
8. So that's a bit about pornography. At this point of writing this paper, that's the part I'm most uncertain about actually. But I think the analogy of pornography stands on rather weak grounds because there are certainly some elements, some similarities, but it's unclear why we should call food porn in strong sense. But I mean, what now about the possibility of food porn being art? Well, the way how I approach this is from, I mean, using an analogy. So when you consider still lifes, so there's I mean, I basically brought this picture out because this is my favorite painting, and just for you to see. Anyway, but in a way it illustrates, this is a picture where I think the proper engagement with it is taking, insofar as hedonic engagement, it should be purely visual pleasure. If you read about the intentions of Cotan behind making this picture, this is supposed to be instrument for religious contemplation. Purpose was to contemplate certain geometric structures. I mean, all in all, it's actually religious motivation. But if any pleasure is taken in this picture, then the appropriate pleasure seems to be visual, taking pleasure in this visual form. But there's other still lives where I would think that the CGI seems to be a proper response. I mean, it's very hard to speculate of intentions, Monet's intentions, or even better still, I think, is Koya's intentions behind making these pictures. But there, it seems like what those paintings do to viewers like me, and hopefully some other people as well, is generating something like CGI. So especially in Koya's case, it's kind of accentuation of yellow stimulates my imagination of tasting certain foodstuffs that I associate with yellow color. But in any case, it seems like in certain cases, still like the CGI seems to be something like the CGI seems to be proper. So that's an analogy. So I mean, it's not like a full-fledged argument, but given that some still lives properly afford pleasurable conceptual imaginings, it seems like this can be both aesthetic and artistic merit. It's like achievement of an artist if he manages to cause in the viewer so those imaginings, then they can have aesthetic and artistic merit. And if they can, it still lives qualify as art. I mean, usually people think they qualify as art, although often said to be lower art, minor art, then so can FTV art. But just to maybe try to strengthen or at least elaborate my case, so at least under one conception of an artwork, as I understand it, the so-called aesthetic conception of artwork, artwork is primarily intended to create this aesthetic experience in the viewer or the one who engages with artwork. So like we can ask like a bit further, can we call this CGI the pleasure that we get from CGI aesthetic experience in some way? And there, I mean, my strategy is somewhat similar to the. I mean, it's same as in the pornography case. I just consider some understanding of aesthetic experience. So what Stecker offers, so aesthetic experience as the experience of attending in a discriminating manner to forms, qualities, meaningful features of things, and attending to them for their own sake, or the sake of this very experience. I mean, I think under this understanding, pleasurable arousal in CGI qualifies an aesthetic experience. People who watch FP, they value this because of that very same experience. It seems there's nothing more to it. There's no like more like instrumental value that they get from watching or constructing those custom objects. So on this understanding, I don't think there's no problem of calling CGI-based pleasurable arousal aesthetic experience. Carroll's case, who understands experience in terms of content, this is actually more problematic, I guess. But he defines aesthetic experience as involving attending to formal and or expressive properties of the object and the relations between those properties and non-responses. Well, I mean, I can't speak for expressive properties of food porn, although it's an interesting question, perhaps. But I mean, I don't see why these kind of visual properties and in relation to the imagined flavor properties couldn't qualify as formal properties. But here, I mean, Carroll himself is rather vague in his account, so I kind of deferring possible issues with this my analysis to him in a way. But I think it's still under his understanding, this pleasure of arousal can be understood as aesthetic experience. I mean, like understanding of aesthetic experience, which used to be relatively popular in terms of disinterest. I mean, even if you take this understanding on board, I don't think appreciation of FP is excluded from being aesthetic experience. It can be disinterested in the sense that it's not related to like further concerns of either eating or hunger or whatever. So it's focused on that experience itself or the pleasure that you get from the experience. Final 2 minutes. 2 minutes. There's a final bit which I'm gonna skip, but I think it's fine. So final objection would be that, and there are many more, I suppose, but just but I consider one final objection against the idea that food porn can be art. So one could argue that while still life, in contrast, are created with artistic purpose. Talking about artistic purpose in the context of food porn is maybe awkward. But it's now how to respond to this. It depends on how to understand artistic purpose. I mean, there's more like a substantive understanding of artistic purpose in terms of intending to present something to the historically defined art world, institutionally defined art world, or something like that. Then yeah, I'm not sure if there's any art world of food porn. I'm not sure. There's no like clear institution here, perhaps. But I mean, if artistic purpose understood in terms of intention for things to be appreciated in an aesthetically relevant way, or intended to cause aesthetic experience, then artistic purpose too. Then food porn, as it presently is, can count as having artistic purpose. So since I don't have much more time for this last bit, I just very briefly mentioned what I wanted to consider in the last bit was to consider if, like, if you now consider the artistic merit regarding the achievement of the person who made the image, then can we compare or like evaluate those FP pictures as having more or less merit? And then I actually wanted to use, or I've used Moan's approach to artists and aesthetics in terms of primary and secondary attractors. And I wanted to suggest that insofar as FP appeals to primary attractors like sugar and fatty foods and so forth, then these pictures have less artistic merit than those that appeal to secondary attractors. But since I don't have more time, I have Mohan's picture. Very briefly. And it's not, I mean, this was idea or like a recipe for artistic merit, but maybe, I mean, it's kind of was pointing towards rather like, almost like elitist direction, that somehow these are these meritorious FP pictures, these are like these lower merit pictures of lower merit, and this might generate certain like awkward issues of like elitism and that kind of stuff. So in conclusion, given the response profile, I would say a typical response profile that people have towards FP images, I think there's room for both aesthetic and artistic merit when it comes to FP food porn. And of course, this is not to say that having any master works of food porn, and maybe, I mean, this would be like a bigger thing to say that somehow there can be masterworks in food porn. But I think from the perspective of like almost like a folk art, let's say, there's certain, so that we can say that food porn also merits interest from philosophers of art and aestheticians. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Now it's time for the comments by Ricardo Lena from the hosting institution. Jan?
Thanks. And well, thanks, Peter, for sharing your paper and for your talk. So I take it that the main point Uku makes in his paper is that, for the most part, the kind of pleasure we get from food porn is enabled by what he calls constructive gustatory imaginings. And I like that part of the paper quite a bit, which is the main one. I don't work on aesthetics, so this may not seem much, but I think it's quite plausible. And then in your paper, you make a separate point derived from this, and it's that perhaps the artistic value had by food porn can be enhanced by this property it has of enabling these constructive gustatory images. I thought that was quite interesting, and actually I would like to hear more about it. Now, there are a few worries I have about the paper, and more than anything, I think it has to do with framing. And more specifically, I'm not sure that food porn is the concept you want to be asking these philosophical questions about. I think that at the end of the day, this notion may be more distracting than it is helpful. So I'm going to say a few bits about this. So first of all, it's not super clear how to understand the concept, and you mentioned that in your talk. But if you look at, let's say, Reddit or Twitter, the way this notion is used is quite permissive. Pretty much anything counts as food porn, as long as it contains tasty food. So if you visit the subreddit on food porn today, you'll see that one of the most popular posts is just somebody took a picture of a box of donuts and uploaded it. Nothing special about the picture, just a bunch of donuts. And it got like 15,000 upvotes, I think. So, you know, if pretty much any picture of food, of tasty food, can count as food porn, why not just talk instead of pictures of tasty food, rather than this distracting notion? Because when you start talking about food porn, you end up asking questions about whether this is porn, or whether it's a derogatory term and this and that. Whereas if you were to use another concept, you could pretty much ask the same questions you're asking without being distracted by these other issues. And actually, I'm going to say a bit more about this. But on the other hand, you may think, well, food porn is not just like pictures of tasty food. We can use some more constrained notions. So the pictures have to be quite stylish, quite produced. But then I'm not confident that's the move you want to make, because your view applies to a wide array of pictures. You can say that a crappy picture of a donut box enables also this constructive gustatory imagining. And the same goes for many other pictures of food that are not stylish in any sense. So I'm not saying that the concept is really needed or useful. So that's the first point I wanted to make. And the second point, of course, is quite related. So in the paper, just spend quite a bit of time trying to convince us that food porn is not porn. And if you're focused on food porn and pornography, the question may seem pressing. But food porn is just an instance of a wider internet phenomenon. There is space porn, for example. You visit the subreddit, you'll see people uploading images of space, the moon, and planets, and rockets. There is chess porn. There's pictures of chess players intensely playing chess, or pictures of famous chessboards. There is yarn porn. Yarning, the balls that people used to knit sweaters, and there is architecture porn, traveling porn, all sorts of porn. And when you consider the wide variety of the phenomenon, the question of whether there is some connection with porn doesn't seem to be quite pressing. Like to ask whether chess porn is pornography doesn't seem very pressing, right? But honestly, my impression after looking at these sorts of export is that the only connection between these kinds of porn and pornography is something like, if we look at how intensely a teenager looks at porn, it's similar to how intensely people look at pictures of chess or space or food. That, to my mind, I don't see any connection beyond that. And I think that that's one of the reasons I think that the concept of food porn is more distracting than it can be than helpful. And the final consideration is about it's quite similar. You spend quite a bit of time in the paper, at least, discussing whether chess porn. That's my favorite kind. Whether food porn can be art. And what I thought as I was reading the paper is, it seems like food porn, the kind of food porn you're considering, is just it's photography. And then I thought, well, photography has artistic value, or at least it can. And actually, it was quite hard to me to think of a type of photography that couldn't, in principle, have artistic value. Like wedding pictures can have artistic value. Paloma asked me to consider whether passport pictures can have artistic value. And if the photographer is creative enough within the constraints of passport picture, I think you could create art. Now, in the paper, you say that there is a debate about whether porn can be art, and I'm not sure what those people are thinking. So maybe there's an interesting question. But what I wanted to flag is that I was worried that if food porn is just some kind of photography, and in general, like photography can have artistic value, then I don't see why you had to spend that much time in your paper trying to convince us that food porn can have artistic value. Now, let me reiterate, I think the part where you say that this constructive gustatory imagination can contribute to the artistic value of food porn is quite interesting. And I would like to know more about that, but I'm not sure I was not that sure about the part about convincing us that food porn can have artistic value.
Now, you have 5 minutes.
So, first thing to say in response is that and to make some concessions, is that when I've talked about this paper and this topic to other people in Estonia also, I sometimes say that my topic is food photography. So this paper has gone through various stages, and kind of in its current form, the stress is in this gustatory imaginings, pleasurable gustatory imaginings, their aesthetic, like what they contribute to aesthetic value, and in context of food photography. So it's, yeah, I'm kind of moving in that direction that you actually were like, in a way, like pulling me as well. Then again, as for the notion of food porn being just like, well, given that there's yarn porn and chest porn and so forth, and this food porn being just like not like sufficiently significant term, I feel like when I consider like this public discourse, then food porn is a term that actually figures relatively often in media, and outside of this very, very niche, almost fetishistic attraction to some very particular things. So there's like food porn as like it's still like picks out a certain like phenomenon that has some socio-cultural relevance. And when you think like people talk, eventually it might be rather like empty concept, at least like as a concept, it plays a much like significant role in this kind of human social life in the media than, I don't know, yarn porn and chest porn and so forth. So, this is my response to your second and first question. First question, maybe. So, when on one hand I made this concession, on the other hand, I still wanted to say that, well, there's something more to food porn than to other kinds of porn. So how to like bring these two seemingly like diverging threads together. And I also almost want to say I should write 2 papers, one of them about cultural like significant food porn, another about food photography. Then again, maybe one way I would would like to do this, to bring them together, is to still like, given that food porn has more importance in people's lives and is more like in a way like transcends this very like localized interest of some few like weird people. Few is maybe such a term. It's still like kind of interesting to like try to make sense of this seemingly rather substantial interest, which that's my speculation at this point. Which like, sorry. I would like to say that there are like reasons to bring like justification or rationalization, not in a bad way, but rationalization to people's behavior who watch food porn like regularly and like seemingly for whom food porn plays an important part of their lives. While in case of this kind of, let's call them, I don't know, chest porn fetishes, something like that. Obviously, I don't want to disparage them. They are perfectly nice and fine people. But there's like no like, there's nothing particularly theoretically interesting to that passion that they have. While this kind of particular passion that plays an important role in people's lives regarding food porn, there's like, I would like to like there's like reason to like inquire into it and kind of like try to make sense of what they're up to, because it doesn't seem to be just like click 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 and that's all that happens, or like there's something like going on. And the way I try to make sense of this is in terms of those causatory imaginings, which gives like some structure to the activity, which goes further than kind of obsessive. It's not merely obsessive compulsive behavior. That's like the most immediate response I can give. If I had time to think about it more, I would have like maybe give a more full response. But yeah, that's what I have.
Okay, thanks. Now please raise your hand. Okay, it's up.
Okay, so I think your account's basically right, and I agree with a lot about it, but I just think there's another way of bringing it out, and also emphasizing some comparison with actual porn. So I think the cool phenomenon I identify is that we don't actually want to eat a lot of food porn things. Well, I was also doing some research when you're giving the talk, and whatever, there's like a sandwich that's like brisket topped with mac and cheese inside, or like this like sushi burrito with like hot Cheetos on the outside. I don't really want to eat any of this, but I kind of fantasize about eating them. Right? And I think that's exactly what your account says. Like if I were a being with like a much bigger mouth and a much bigger stomach, maybe I want to eat these things. And I think there's a way in which this really connects to how at least certain porn works. So incest porn is a pretty popular genre, but I take it not so many people want to have incest sex, or at least here's an empirical conjecture. Much more people watch incest porn than the people who want to have incest sex. Right, so there's a way in which it's very much about the fantasy, the imagining that's in the process, like dislocated from your current embodied location. And I think that's the same with the kind of food porn, and it fits your account really well. And it also fits, I think, with what you say about recipes. Like, people buy like whatever the molecular gastronomy cookbook, and I think part of it is like I'm not really gonna spend whatever $2,000 to buy the special equipment and spend days to make this dish, but like it's nice to be able to fantasize about it. So I think like maybe a way to set it up is like there's like this puzzle of food porn. Why don't we actually want to eat the food that's in food porn, right? And here's like a really nice imagination-based explanation. Notice how it also explains a lot of what goes on with sex porn and recipe porn. And I don't know a little less about the others, but perhaps there as well.
Yeah. So maybe just two quick responses. I mean, three. First is just I agree. There's nothing like there's no disagreement there. To just elaborate on my agreement, if you consider this disgusting burger picture, I would never want to eat it, but I do take pleasure in watching it, some pleasure at least. So, what actually I mean now, this particular topic, what's actually like more inspired me to think more general terms about like so to speak, idealizing role of imagination, in the sense that in imagination we can like consider certain things, experience certain things that actually, well, in regular life they would be either too exhaustive, or disgusting, or it's like through imagination we can actually experience something like distinct from the actuality, although there's like interesting relations between them.
Okay. We are full of questions, so please one question for Capita, Alejandro.
Oh yeah, so mine is actually more of a reply to Ricardo, but it's a friendly comment to you. So anyway, so I think that one way to perhaps drive home the message is that there is like a classical connection between sex and food that there is not between sex and chess. Sex is sure. So I mean, there is this famous, I think, 1960s or 70s movie. I don't know the exact name in English. It's something like the Great Buffet or something like that, where there are 3, 4, 5 people who buy the best food from all over the world, lock themselves in an apartment, and keep eating and having sex until they die. And you know, so there is this like visceral, non-intellectual connection that you have both to the human body and to food that you don't have to a chessboard or to a star. And so I think that, you know, so we want to explain why porn food has become so big in chess companies. And I think that this is part of the reason that there is visceral connection drive, which is mostly non-intellectual and non-verbal, but just
Can I answer with one sentence?
Yeah.
I agree, but I think it would be better, more helpful to frame those questions as questions about food photography, and the food porn may be distracting in some way.
Okay, I mean, I don't want to question, but if you want to make it an issue about labels, I mean, we can also talk about
No, it's concepts, like which concepts are more useful.
Okay.
Can I also give us remark on that? So,
We're gonna have dinner, so.
so just I mean, again, agreeing with you actually, with all of you said, it's like in case of so-called chessboard, like immediate inclination is to use like some of the word fetish here. There's something almost fetishistic here. Maybe not fetish, but it's like fetishizing chess. But I guess food, I don't know. It's like yeah, sex and food. They kind of see the connection here.
Okay, so as I understand it, food porn is like a glamorized representation of food that tries to promote consumption of food, but also at the same time tries to provoke sexual arousal, right?
Neither.
No?
So one of my ideas was that actually it doesn't promote consumption, but this is responses that we have that actually don't imply motivation to consume, and no sexual arousal. I mean, okay, maybe, but that's just I didn't say that. I didn't say that watching food porn causes sexual arousal. It causes what I call gustatory arousal, which might be like something similar, but it's a different thing. It's about taste and flavor.
Okay, so I misunderstood it. But I can think of throughout our history the use of food and fruits in particular as symbols of sexuality and trying to kind of provoke sexual arousal. Yeah. I think of several examples, like Diego Rivera has a series of paintings of radish that are like, thankfully, kind of very sexually explicit. Yeah, or I can think of some paintings like Caravaggio's Boy with a basket of fruit, in which the depiction of fruit.
Yeah, Caravaggio is very tense all the time, I feel.
Yeah, and maybe you can think of these kind of pictures as kind of a pornographic use of food.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I just feel that it's a different phenomenon where you actually have a explicitly or symbolically sexual meaning to what is in the picture. So it's like a different thing. I didn't talk about that. I didn't talk about symbolizing sex through food, which is I think different thing. But I totally agree that this is a very common thing, and it might be interesting connections here with food porn, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, but also the line that divides porn and art is kind of not very clear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, I don't like those exclusionist views. I do think that porn can be art.
Okay, Ian?
Okay, I think I too am sort of trying to defend the term food porn, but maybe on slightly different ground. And this will involve saying something about, or trying to say something about masturbation. And I don't really want to advance a view about masturbation, but why people might think these images are masturbatory in a certain way. And let's say, what is supposed to be wrong with masturbation? Well, or somehow, is that there is, let's say, an aspiration for human connection through sex that sort of fails in masturbation. You know, you don't actually do the hard work of engaging with a human being and others. And maybe like the food porn idea is that there's something kind of like you peeled off the actually important thing of really eating food or really cooking food or really, and you're just somehow getting this shallow, and I don't know. So that's the defense of the term, like why you might think there's something kind of, I'm just saying, masturbatory about these images.
Yeah, I mean, adjective masturbatory is used in a rather wide context. I mean, always, of course, I see your point, and thing is, maybe I was too dismissive of that idea that someone is analog of release or getting off or something like that. I mean, this analogy stands, I think, but yeah, I mean, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Vietnamese. He pretty much has this kind of view of porn more broad that you should turn pornographic. It's about like avoiding the real like consequences of things and focusing on this immediate pleasure that you get. Yeah. I mean, I do have to think about it, and I should have thought about it already, actually. I think.
Okay,
this question is related to previous ones, but earlier in your presentation you said that this food porn author shows sugary fatty foods, right? So do you think that there's a specific role of impossibility in food porn? Because you also mentioned mukbang, and the fact that mukbang often shows people eating great amounts of food, and that's something that people, well, don't usually do. I think that even the term food porn, in that term, there's a lot of prohibition of something that you are not supposed to be doing in public, for example. So, do you think that this can show that food porn is something that you should not be doing as an individual, or at least announce it to the world?
Well, I felt like one point about impossibility. Here, I would say that although one of the conclusions I'd like to draw from these discussions here is that actually, at least in some contexts, food porn is something that achieves something that can't be achieved in the real world. So, I mean, for instance, like we can take pleasure in those really like ridiculously fatty and sugary, like loaded with fat and sugar, these kind of foods, but which in a way it would be impossible in actuality to enjoy, but at least you can enjoy it in imagination. That's about the prohibitory element. So it might occasionally might be relevant, or it might be relevant that certain things that you take pleasure in imagining and watching that picture would be at least frowned upon in real life or something like that, and so it's you can like release this thing that your desire to do that through like imagination or something like that. This is certainly can happen. I don't think it's like so. I wouldn't think it's so prominent, but it's just an intuition. I don't know what to say precisely to you.
But you think is it substantial to the concept of food porn itself, or
I wouldn't think so.
Like
I don't think it's essential.
Okay, Axel?
I mean, food porn, as you insisted, it lives very much because of the hashtag and because you consume lots of it and you keep clicking. And that is practically the definition of manner in specificity. So I think there's good reason to think that food porn is manner in specific, because you don't care if this time it's this hamburger on this angle and the next one is a donut. It's just this keeping consuming more.
But that's why I was rather evasive in talking about can food porn be art. Talking about like what's possible in a way. And I think it's certainly not. And I think it actually happens that some people who create those photos, they really care that the people who watch this like focus on those particular ways how this image is shown. So yeah.
But the same is true in porn, right? You also, photographers also care about these things sometimes, other times they don't. But
yeah. How to pronounce his name? I keep failing at pronouncing that guy's name. Maguire. I don't buy into his view actually, but I just was considering it, and I think food porn is maybe often in manner inspecific, but I don't think it's always like that. It clearly has, but can be manner specific as well.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I come back to one question. So do you think that there is any evidence that people consume photographies of food porn because it has something related to what you have in mind? So would people spend more time watching food porn than any other thing that they're interested in? So there are much more photos because, for example, it's more fashionable. So food is much more fashionable than chess. So that might be a simple explanation for the fact that we have many more photos. So if you have data, you don't need to have it. No, I'm not demanding that. So that's showing that the people are like more attracted to that. And one previous connection. So there seem to be more other forms of primitive. I don't know how to call it. Primitive. Right. Yeah. That would be related to sex, like eating, also violence, maybe between. So that I don't find this very convincing. So why do you think that this is special? So people just spend hours seeing photos, no matter what. I mean, that's what we do. And do you think that there is something special to that? Would you expect that in?
But it's a relevant and good question, and my answer, unfortunately, is that this is rather based on this kind of introspection of what I care about. But and it was nice to have more like sociological and ethnographic studies, for instance. And I have read, of course, the little I have found about that, and it certainly seems to be the case that food depicting images are have a special role to play among many people's lives, so they kind of stand out among any other types of image. And as for I know there's so much in your question in a way that I don't know much to say.
Well, I think that I am a consumer of food porn quite a lot. I think this is a porn that I can confess to consume. I'm not convinced about the account of the imagining the gustatory object because maybe it's just introspection, but I never felt first. I don't think that I imagine anything. Well, that's just incidental. And certainly I don't fantasize about, there's no desire involved in eating food. Not because I don't like, it's just, I don't feel any desire when I see these things, right? So, I do think there's, the visual part is more powerful. So here are two reasons, at least, why the imagining account, is not convincing, apart from my incidental introspection. First, because the majority of the times I see the images, I'm not hungry, and even, imagining that I'm eating something or imagining an object that I can eat would be like, would be disgusting, and I don't feel disgusted. It's pleasure, right? And second, and probably more important, is that there are many things that I see in food porn that I know that I don't like. I mean, I don't fantasize about the possibility of eating them if I like them, right? But I feel pleasure when I see them. So I think it's a visual pleasure. And I think that one way to account for that, I mean, because you're right, I mean, the problem with visual pleasure is that we need to account, there's something, we need to say something about the visual pleasure being about food, right? Mm-hmm. But perhaps, I mean, perhaps the content of your experience, of your visual experience tracks, as Ophelia was saying yesterday, certain things. I don't think edibility could be the one, but I mean, there might be something it is to look delicious. There is a look of deliciousness, independently of whether you like it or not. I mean, I don't like super sugary cakes. I know that, but they look delicious, right? So maybe something like that. I mean, or maybe you can infer that they are delicious by the way they look. But it seems that it's more visual.
So starting from the last point, I kind of have assumed, and it's might be false, I have assumed this kind of very sparse view of the content of visual perception. That was like my background, it has been in the background. In which case, like deliciousness is somewhat is like excluded from the content. That's just to clarify my assumptions here. But I mean, even like moving like to the big like backwards, so to speak. So, but let's say like we can perceive deliciousness. I mean, I still think that I mean, it's in order for this belong to visual content, there has to be some kind of, I mean, in some sense, kind of learning where we have been able to associate those visual features with certain gustatory features. And I mean, and it's broadly speaking, I would say, it's also imaginative process. It seems like close to some kind of imaginative association. But then again, when it comes to multimodal association, one could argue that maybe this is more, it's a more brute process, you know, like imagination. So again, I'm kind of vacillating in that sense. But as for now, issue of like when you think of your own experience and you don't really detect any imagining. Well, I mean, I guess I don't really detect like imagining like eating or like genuinely eating either. If I imagine eating that object. But at least in my phenomenology, there's like, I imagine the flavor, definitely imagine flavor. Now, you say you don't even imagine the flavor, then it's kind of, I mean, maybe it sounds like a bad move, but I mean, at least at this point, I also appeal to like to the subpersonal level. So at least there's something imagination like going on, simulation like going on, gustatory simulation going on in our brains. So at least it's not only a matter of our introspective matter. It seems like it genuinely happens when you watch food porn. So it's like some kind of simulation, which I think is broadly speaking imagination. It figures in our.
But that can be triggered by visual.
Visual is still like very crucial here. It's like what is like input in a way to that imaginative process. That's definitely the case.
Thanks.
So, in defense of Ricardo now. So, I mean, it's true that porn, and sex porn, involves an act, usually, which has many of the components of a sexual act. Maybe you could even call it a sexual act for those reasons. Whereas all of the other kinds of porn that Ricardo mentioned, or none of the other kinds of porn that Ricardo mentioned, food porn, holiday porn, real estate porn, so none of them on your account involves any of the actual components of buying real estate, going on a holiday, etc. And it doesn't even involve actual desire on your account. Yeah. At best, it involves make-believe desire, right? So there is something that sets real porn aside from all of the other categories of porn, and there's something that unites all the other categories of porn, namely this fake make-believe desire or something of that sort. So I think Ricardo's onto something.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, since I just had these comments, I'm very slow responding. I have to think of it. Because, maybe just, I don't know if it helps any means, but in the written version, I actually draw a comparison between food porn and erotic art. So, actually, if you read Levinson also writes about erotic art, and there actually, he kind of thinks that erotic art, something is erotic art where response is actually like, it involves arousal as well, but it's more about just like focusing on the structure of what we get from this, feeling that we get from this. Actually, this doesn't respond to the question, sorry, I just...
That's okay, just go on your own.
Yeah, that's like this issue that they didn't cover, and in a way, it just even complicates these issues even more. I would say, at least it's, I mean, you said realistic porn, and I feel like I could maybe like realistic porn as maybe very much understand it in these terms that I like put my food porn interpretation. This is maybe also about constructivization. So maybe there's certain kinds of weird porn that actually are very easily relatable, and then it would be perhaps fine. That would be on like a nice, like I would still think that then certain like yarn, like certain kinds of very like simplistic types of so X porn, as you said, there this kind of more elaborate structure. I would like to argue. I mean, I haven't really thought it through. I think this is missing. So I think this. I just need to make more like distinctions here, and actually there's still like, and the results might be really interesting actually. So there's like real porn, and so there's like like erotic art like porn that also belongs to like also you can have for food and real estate maybe, and then there's like fully like kind of weird automatic behavior which you can again it's labeled porn quite often, but it's again different. So like there's like lots of different phenomena here.
Okay. This is the final question? Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, that was really fascinating. So I was wondering a little bit about the desire account. So I was thinking that food porn involves producing this sort of kind of desires. So I see why you reject that, but I guess I was thinking that some kinds of food porn seem really desire centric. So in particular, I was thinking about a lot of food porn that's produced not on Reddit or Instagram, but by advertisers and restaurants themselves. So I was thinking that kind of predates the Instagram food porn, and I'm thinking like those people don't care about producing any imaginary whatevers in you. They care about like the money in their bank accounts. And I don't know, it must be successful because Burger King's been doing it for like 80 years or something. So I was thinking that okay, it seems like they produce these images to get you to desire their product, to come in and spend their money there. So I don't know, maybe this is just a red herring, but I guess I was just wondering if, like, it seems like a lot of times, at least the production of food porn seems to be with the aim of eliciting desires.
I mean, I think it's a very good question. So, I mean, one thing to say, and that's what's in a way is a flaw in my account of food porn is that I focus on consumers. And in the case of but you talked about advertising, there's like very interesting notes like producers, what they're aiming at, right? So I was just thinking of like production response that we have these kind of pictures that are arousing, but I wouldn't say that. I mean, I totally will grant that there are often cases where a person who watches this kind of glamorized picture of food, they also either acquire the desire or strengthen their already existing desire on the like when they watch this stuff. So I think this clearly can happen often. I think that there's like also cases where this desire actually there is no desire. It doesn't even occur, and then what happens there? Then was my main question. But of course, I don't exclude situations where this desire also occurs. And where desire is relevant, and I think it often happens when people create these pictures. And of course, not only in advertising, might be many cases also in case of Instagram, they do aim at like generating desires, and that can be often successful. But I think there's like the CGI type of response is something that's also there, and it seems like that doesn't require desire; it's just something else.
Okay, it's time of speaker.